The Education of Little Tree by Forrest Carter. The Passing Song, page 1137. We wintered good, though me and Grandpa was put to it to keep up with the woodcutting. Grandpa had got behind and said that if I had not come back, they'd more than likely have froze that winter, which they would. It was a hard freeze winter. We most times had to set fires and thaw out our running lines at the still when we run off our wares. Grandpa said hard winters was necessary occasional. It was nature's way of cleaning things up and making things grow better. The ice broke off the weak limbs of the trees, so only the strong ones come through. It cleaned out the soft acorns and chinkapins, chestnuts and walnuts, and made for a hardier food crop in the mountains. Spring come, and planting time. We upped our corn planting, figuring to make the run of our wares a little bigger in the fall. It was hard times, and Mr. Jenkins said the whiskey trade was picking up while everything else was going down. He said he reckoned a feller had to drink more whiskey to forget how bad off he was. During the summer, I come up to 7 years. Grandma give me the marriage stick of my ma and pa. It didn't have many notches on it, for they was not married long. I put it in my room across the headboard of my bed. Summer give way to fall, and one Sunday, Willa John didn't come. We come across the clearing that summer, but we didn't see him standing under the elm. I run far back into the trees and called, "Willa John." He wasn't there. We turned back and didn't go to church. We come home. Grandma and Grandpa was worried about it. I was too. He had left no sign, for we looked. Grandpa said something was wrong. Me and Grandpa determined to go and find him. We set out before day that Monday morning. By early light, we was past the crossroads store and the church. After that, we commenced to walk mighty near straight upward. It was the highest mountain I ever walked. Grandpa had to slow down, and I kept up easy. It was an old trail, so dim you almost, couldn't see it, running along a ridge that sloped upward and onto another mountain. The trail sidled up the mountain, but always it went up. The trees was shorter and more weathered. At the top of the mountain, a little fold run into the side, not deep enough to be called a holler. Trees grew on its side, and pine needles carpeted the floor. Willa John's lodge was there. It was not built of big logs like our cabin, but of smaller lodge poles, and set back in the trees against the bank of the fold sheltered. We had brought Blue Boy and Little Red with us. When they saw the lodge, they raised their noses and commenced to whine. It was not a good sign. Grandpa went in first. He had to stoop to go through the door, and I followed him. There was only one room in the lodge. Willa John lay on a bed of deer hides spread over spring boughs. He was naked. The long copper frame was withered like an old tree, and one hand lay limp on the dirt floor. Grandpa whispered, "Willa John?" Willa John opened his eyes. His eyes was far away, but he grinned. "I knew you would come," he said, "and so I waited." Excuse me. Grandpa found an iron pot and sent me for water. I found it trickling from rocks behind the lodge. There was a fire pit just inside the door, and Grandpa built a fire and put the pot over it. He dropped strips of deer meat in the water, and after they had boiled, raised Willa John's head in the cradle of his arm and spooned the broth down him. I got blankets from a corner, and we covered Willa John. He didn't open his eyes. Night come on. Me and Grandpa kept the fire going in the fire pit. The wind whistled on the mountaintop and whined around the corners of the lodge. Grandpa sat cross-legged before the fire, and the light flickered over his face, changing it from old to older, making it look like rock crags and cliffs in the shadows of his cheekbones, till all I could see was the eyes looking at the fire, burning black, not like flames, but like embers going out. I curled around the fire pit and slept. It was morning when I woke. The fire was beating back, fog drifting in the door. Grandpa still sat by the fire like he hadn't moved at all, though I know he had kept it burning. John stirred. Me and Grandpa went to his side, and his eyes was open. He raised his hand and pointed. "Take me outside." Excuse me. "It's cold out," Grandpa said. "I know," John whispered. Grandpa had a hard time getting John into his arms, for he was total limp. I tried to help. Grandpa carried him out the door, and I dragged the spring boughs behind them. Grandpa clambered up the bank of the fold to a high point, and we laid John on the spring boughs. We wrapped him in blankets and put his boot moccasins on his feet. Grandpa folded hides and propped up his head. The sun broke through behind us and chased the fog into deep, searching shade. John was looking west across the wild mountains and deep hollows as far as you could see toward the nations. Grandpa went to the lodge and come back with John's long knife. He put it in his hand. John raised the knife and pointed to an old fir pine that was bent and twisted. He said, "When I have gone, put the body there close to her. She has dropped many young and warmed me and sheltered me. It will be good. The food will give her 2 more seasons." "We will," Grandpa said. "Tell B," John whispered, "it will be better next time." "I will," Grandpa said. He sat down by John and taken his hand. I sat on the other side and taken his other hand. "I will wait for you," John told Grandpa. "We will come," Grandpa said. I told John that more than likely it was the flu. Grandma had said that it was going around practical everywhere. I told him I was mighty near certain that we could get him on his feet and down the mountain where he could stay with us. I told him the whole thing was to get on his feet, and then he could more than likely make it. He grinned at me and squeezed my hand. "You have a good heart, little tree, but I do not want to stay. I want to go. I will wait for you." I cried. I told John, reckon if he couldn't figure on staying a little longer, maybe he could go next year when it would be warmer. I told him the hickory nut crop would be good this winter. I told him you could might near see right off that the deer would be fat. He grinned, but he didn't answer. He looked far out over the mountains toward the west, like me and Grandpa was not there anymore. He began his passing song, telling the spirits he was coming, the death song. It began low in his throat and rose higher and commenced to get thinner. In a little while you couldn't tell if it was the wind or John that you heard. His eyes got dimmer as his throat muscles moved weaker. Me and Grandpa saw the spirit slipping away farther back in his eyes, and we felt it leaving his body. Then he's gone. The wind whooshed across us and bent the old fir pine. Grandpa said it was John, and he had a strong spirit. We watched it bending just the tops of the trees on the ridges, moving down the side of the mountain and raising a flock of crows into the air. They called and set off down the mountain with John. Me and Grandpa sat and watched him move out of sight over the rims and humps of the mountains. We sat a long time. Grandpa said John would be back and that we could feel him in the wind and hear him on the talking fingers of the trees, which we would. Excuse me. Me and Grandpa taking our long knives and dug the hole as close to the old fir pine as we could get. We dug it deep. Grandpa wrapped another blanket around John's body, and we laid it in the hole. He put John's hat in the hole too, and let the long knife stay in his hand where he had gripped it. We piled rocks heavy and deep over the body of John. Grandpa said the coons must be kept away, for John was determined the tree was to have the food. The sun was setting in the west when I followed Grandpa down from the mountain. We had left the lodge as we'd found it. Grandpa carried a deer shirt of John's to give to Grandma. When we reached the hollow, it was after midnight. I heard a mourning dove far back calling. It was not answered, so I knew it called for John. Grandma lit the lamp when we come in, and Grandpa laid John's shirt on the table and did not say nothing, and Grandma knew. We didn't go to church after that. I didn't care, for Willa John would not be there. We was to have 2 more years together, me and Grandpa and Grandma. Maybe we knew time was getting close, but we didn't speak of it. Grandpa went everywhere now with me and Grandpa. We lived it full. We pointed out things like the reddest of the leaves in the fall to make sure the others saw it, the bluest violet in the spring, so we all tasted and shared the feeling together. Grandpa's step got slower. His moccasins dragged some when he walked. I told him more of the fruit jar wares in my tow sack and taken to handling more of the heavy work. We didn't mention it. Grandpa showed me how to curve the down swing of an axe so you move through a log fast and easy. I pulled more of the corn than he did, leaving the ears easiest to reach for him, but I didn't say nothing. I remembered what Grandpa had said about old Ringer feeling he was still of worth. That last fall, old Sam died. I told Grandpa I reckon we hadn't better see about another mule. Grandpa said it was a long time till spring. Let's wait and see. We taken the high trail more regular, me and Grandpa and Grandma. The climb was slower for them, but they loved to sit and watch the mountain rims. It was on the high trail that Grandpa slipped and fell, and he didn't get up. Me and Grandpa sighted him down the mountain, and he kept saying, "I'll be all right directly." But he wasn't. We put him a bed. Pine Billy come by. He stayed with us and sat up with Grandpa. Grandpa wanted to hear his fiddle, and Pine Billy played. There in the lamplight with his homemade hair cropping hanging over his ears and his long neck bent over the fiddle, Pine Billy played. Tears run down his face onto the fiddle and dropped over his overalls. Grandpa said, "Quit crying, Pine Billy. You're messing up the music. I want to hear the fiddle." Pine Billy choked and said, I ain't crying. I catched a cold." Then he dropped his fiddle and flung himself at the foot of Grandpa's bed and laid his head in the bedclothes. He heaved and cried. Pine Billy never was one to hold himself in about nothing. Grandpa raised up his head and hollered weak, "You damn idiot, you're getting Red Eagle snuff all over the bed sheets," which he was. I cried too, but I didn't let Grandpa see. Grandpa's body-mind commenced to stumble and sleep, his spirit-mind taking over. He talked to Willa John a lot. Grandma held his head in her arms and whispered in his ear. And Grandpa come back to his body-mind. He wanted his hat, which I got, and he put it on his head. I held his hand, and he grinned. "It was good, little tree. Next time it'll be better. I'll be seeing you," and he slipped off like Willa John had done. I knew it was going to happen, but I didn't believe it. Grandma laid on the bed by Grandpa, holding him tight, and Pine Billy was bawling on the foot of the bed. I slipped out of the cabin. The hounds was baying and whining, for they knew. I walked down the hollow trail and taken the cut-off trail. I was not following Grandpa, and then I knew the world had come to an end. I was blinded and fell and got up and walked and fell again, I don't know how many times. I come to the crossroads store and I told Mr. Jenkins Grandpa was dead. Mr. Jenkins was too old to walk, and he sent his son, a full-grown man, to go back with me. He led me by the hand like I was a mountaineer baby, for I could not see the trail nor know where I was going. Mr. Jenkins' son and Pine Billy made the box. I tried to help. I recollected Grandpa said you was obliged to pitch in when folks was trying to do for you. But I wasn't much account at it. Pine Billy cried so much he wasn't either. He hit his thumb with the hammer. They carried Grandpa up the high trail, Grandma leading and Pine Billy and Mr. Jenkins' son carrying the box. Me and the hounds come behind. Pine Billy kept a-crying, which made it hard on me to hold myself in, not wanting to trouble Grandma. And the hounds whined. I knew where Grandma was a-taking Grandpa. It was to his secret place, high on the mountain trail, where he watched the day birth and never got tired of it, and never quit saying, "She's coming alive," like each time was the first time he'd ever seen it. Maybe it was. Maybe every birthing is different, and Grandpa could see that it was, and he knew it. It was the place Grandpa had taken me first, and so I knew Grandpa kenned me. Grandpa didn't look as we lowered Grandpa in the ground. She watched the mountains far off, and she didn't cry. The wind was strong there on the mountain top, and it lifted her hair braids and streamed them out behind her. Pine Billy and Mr. Jenkins' son walked off back down the trail. Me and the hounds watched Grandma a while, then we slipped away. We waited, sitting under a tree halfway down the trail for Grandma to come, and it was dusk when she did. I tried to pick up Grandma's load and mine too. I tried to pick up Grandpa's load and mine too. I run the still, but I know our wares was not as good. Grandpa got out all Mr. Wine's figuring books and pushed me on learning. I went to the settlement alone and brought back other books. I read them now by the fireplace while Grandma listened and watched the fire. She said I done good. Old Rippet died, and later that winter old Maud. It's just before spring. I come from the Narrows down the hollow trail. I saw Grandma sitting back on the porch. She had moved her rocker there. She didn't watch me as I come down the hollow. She was looking up toward the high trail. I knew she was gone. She had put on the orange and green and red and gold dress that Grandpa loved. She had printed out a note and pinned it on her bosom. It said, "Little tree, I must go. Like you feel the trees feel for us when you are listening. We will wait for you. Next time will be better, as is well. All is well, Grandma." I carried the tiny body into the cabin and put it on the bed and sat with her through the day. Blue Boy and Little Red sat too. That evening I went and found Pine Billy. Pine Billy sat up the night with me and Grandpa. He cried and played his fiddle. He played the wind and the dog star and the mountain rims and the day birthing and dying. Me and Pine Billy knew Grandma and Grandpa was a-listening. We made the box next morning and carried her up the high trail and laid her beside Grandpa. I'd taken the old marriage stick and buried the ends in piles of stone me and Pine Billy put at the head of each grave. I seen the notches they made for me right down near the end of it. They was deep and happy notches. I lasted out the winter, me and Blue Boy and Little Red, until spring. Then I went to Hanging Gap and buried the stills, copper pot, and worm. I was not much good at it, and had not learned the trade as I ought to. I knew Grandpa would not want anybody else using it to turn out bad wares. I took the whiskey trade money that Grandma had set out for me and determined I would head west, across the mountains to the nations. Blue Boy and Little Red went with me, and we just closed the cabin door one morning and walked away. At the farms, I asked for work. If they would not let me keep Blue Boy and Little Red, then I'd move on. Grandpa said a feller owed that much to his hounds, which is right. Little Red fell through creek ice on the Arkansas Ozarks and died like a hound ought to die in the mountains. Me and Blue Boy made it to the nations, where there was no nation. We worked on the farms going west and then the ranches on the flats. One evening late, Blue Boy come aside my horse. He laid down and couldn't get up. He couldn't go any more. I taken him up across my saddle, and we turned our backs on the red setting sun of the Cimarron. We headed east. I would not get my job back riding off this way, but I didn't care. I had bought the horse and saddle for $15, and they was mine. Me and Blue Boy was hunting us a mountain. Before day we found one. It wasn't much of a mountain, more like a hill, but Blue Boy whimpered when he seen it. I toted him to the top as the sun broke the east. I dug him a grave, and he laid and watched. He couldn't raise his head, but he let me know he knew it, for he stiffened a ear and kept his eyes on me. After that I held Blue Boy's head setting on the ground. He licked my hand when he could. In a little while he passed on, easy, and dropped his head over my arm. I buried him deep and rocked his grave with heavy against the creatures. With his nose sense, I figured more than likely Blue Boy was already halfway to the mountains. He'd have no trouble at all catching up with Grandpa. End of chapter and end of story.